Hi, and welcome to our first ever virtual summit. I'm Stephanie Wade, co-founder of ChangeNerd, and this session is brought to you by ChangeNerd Learn, where you can continuously upskill your team with certification programs, next level practices, and tools with our online learning platform. And it's also brought to you by ChangeNerd Gigs, where you can hire top freelance change management professionals to supplement your current transformation efforts. To learn more, hop onto changenerd.com. Enjoy this session.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for reviewing this segment as part of our Change Management Virtual Summit. We're speaking to Kate DeGon, and today we're going to talk a little bit about data and transparency and the importance of those during change management implementations. So Kate, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to have this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So before we get directly into the conversation, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I have been in the space of organizational change management for about 14 years. I think probably like a lot of people, I was doing change management without really knowing I was doing change management towards the beginning. But I've done this work with large organizations, Fortune 500s, even down to the startup level. So have done many types of organizational changes ranging from ERP implementations to mergers and acquisitions, enterprise transformations, organizational growth, or on the other side of it, downsizing. So certainly I've run the gamut of different types of org changes, and then of course throughout various industries as well.
No. So you have great amounts of experience. So Kate, right now we're in 2020. COVID is still alive and well. And for most of us, we've been working virtually, and it's been somewhat difficult. So as change practitioners enter into 2021, what are some of the challenges that you foresee happening as we go forth and work on these projects in 2021, given the current state of work right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, based on the projects that I'm currently working on, which are large enterprise-wide projects, I think, some of the challenges that I'm seeing already is, employees working for the most part in virtual environments.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we foster the engagement that we need in order to bring people on board, get the desire and the want to be able to move forward and stay engaged, right?
Yeah.
We can send communications, but right now gone are those days that we can get, folks together for readiness activities like roadshows or town halls,
Mm-hmm.
or things that, really build that enthusiasm, that excitement for the impending change. So I think keeping people engaged and informed and moving in sync through the change is a challenge. And then I also, at the end of the day, really keeping everyone informed in a way that feels valuable to them based on where they are in the organization. There's a lot of people who don't quite know, what's going to happen with their job really at the end of the day. Are they going to stay remote? Are they going to go back to the office? Is there going to be a reorg, based on business performance? There's just so much anxiety, I think, out there. And everyone, and I think people, quite frankly, in a sense, are almost fatigued with virtual too, right? And it's our only option. So not only are we trying to keep them engaged with an impending change and having to do it virtually, I think there's some virtual fatigue out there as well.
Yeah. So what would you advise change teams that are trying to roll out a large initiative and having challenges with engagement, specifically towards data and transparency? What's your approach to entering data and transparency into our project initiatives?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I'm a huge person in terms of a fan of being informed by data and having transparency into the change process. So what I have seen over the years is that, gathering data on how well a project is going is time consuming. And it takes a lot of effort, especially if it's an enterprise-wide change. You've got a lot of different areas across the enterprise that you're trying to query for how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they're moving through the change. by the time you get that data, oftentimes it's stale. So that makes it difficult.
Mhm.
And then there's the transparency challenge where, you've got typically your centralized change team or a team that's assigned to a particular project to manage the change side of that project. And it's our job really to move people and shepherd them through that respective change. But oftentimes it's a push, right? It's a push from the change team out to the organization in terms of creating that awareness, trying to get the desire, building that knowledge, right? If we're going to talk in ADKAR terms, and then obviously down the road, training for the ability and reinforcement. But it's always kind of that push. So I think now more than ever, it's really important to create transparency in the other direction, right? So having, the impacted people, whether it's your leaders or the individual contributors impacted by change. And when I say impacted, I don't mean that they're going to lose their job, but something about their job is changing, right? Because of the change.
Yeah.
To have them a little bit more involved and create some change, transparency into the change process.
Gotcha.
And so to me, I think that's where people start to become more involved, because it's less of feeling like something is being done to them at a time that makes sense to the project and to the change practitioners, but rather it's something they can engage in when the time is right for them. So there has to be the systems and the functionality set up to create that transparency, to give some knowledge and information and data, whether that's data points or data sets, to the leaders, and help the leaders to best lead through change as well. So it's transparency at the leader-led or the leader level, and then also at the individual contributor level. So, when I think about it, there's some ways to do that. There's obviously change sync, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but if organizations are not using any change software, I think probably the best way to do it is through a change network.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So how can we engage the change network to not just be recipients of the push that comes from the centralized change team, but rather a two-way, make it a true two-way feedback where they're giving us information that we truly need to create customized and catered activities for their respective areas. So, but also obviously taking, what we're sending to them from an enterprise perspective to maintain that consistency that we're trying to create of awareness and knowledge and whatnot. So, I mean, change networks, they are one of my favorite things in the process. Yeah. And if we can do that really well, the change itself is just so much more successful because you do have that engagement and hopefully that transparency and that two-way path to receive data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, to help move that change forward and drive the engagement of the end user population.
Yeah, no, Kate, I love the perspective you're bringing. So a lot of organizations are probably not using software in their change management activities. What would you recommend to the organization or the team that really wants to start leveraging data, in their change agent network, but there may be some cultural barriers there. So what would be like a very first step to really becoming more transparent with the stakeholders? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I always say that it comes down to the very basics of setting the right expectations.
Yeah.
And so if we don't set the right expectations with our change network members of what their role is, of, and some of those, kind of guiding principles, if you will, of perhaps transparency and data being two of those, I think it really creates a situation where people understand conceptually perhaps their role, but they don't necessarily understand what it entails and what is it that they're supposed to do, right? What behaviors are they supposed to exude, and what are the governing principles by which they kind of look to benchmark, am I doing this well, am I not doing it well? So I would certainly set the expectation about how you want this network to be engaged in transparency, and obviously data being one of those. And we might all say that we understand what transparency is, but I would urge people to even go to a greater level of detail. What does transparency mean for that particular network?
Yeah.
Does that mean that there's some sort of system in place for the push information that comes from the change team to those change network stakeholders that says, you know, I'm going to somehow be very clear in what information I want you to pass on and what information I want you to be aware of and to be empowered by and to help coach and mentor others, or, you know, anything of that sort, right? Be very clear. What does transparency mean and what are your expectations around it?
Yeah.
And I would think that transparency should be very clear and being a two-way street. Oftentimes we as the change team say, we're going to be fully transparent with you. We're going to tell you what we know, when we know it. We're going to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, the otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And we promise that, but we often sometimes don't ask for that in return. Right? We don't say, I really want you to be very transparent about what's working and what's not working in your area. And it may be specific to the change, but it may be specific to what the change team is or is not doing. I always tell people, at least in my opinion, it's very hard to hurt the feelings of a change management practitioner. The only way you can hurt their feelings is you don't give them feedback, right? Because then we're going down a road that we think we're going in the right direction. But in actuality, we really need to pivot and go a different direction. But without that feedback, you know, we don't know. So
no, you're right.
Yeah, it's really truly that expectation of the two-way street. And I think, you know, with the quantitative data, you know, we can usually gather that and synthesize it across areas of the organization to try to get a holistic picture of where we are. But sometimes that qualitative data is stuff that, you know, if people aren't using a system that helps return that in real time, then they do need to ask the change network for that feedback and that transparency and that qualitative data as well. How are people thinking? How are they feeling? Help us find the areas of the opportunity that we need to focus on and leverage because they're rock stars and they're doing great. So what makes them so good? Or if there's areas that are struggling, we need to understand that so we can hopefully move people through it as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So on the data side, you know, what on a data side, I'm thinking about the best way to capture it and actually pull in the rest of the organization. So, in your experience, is it better for the project team to kind of identify people related KPIs or even leverage data sets elsewhere across the organization that may be relevant to the project, and kind of that way you're bringing more of the ecosystem in? What is your perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's both. So I do think it's the people KPIs because we want to know how people are thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
You know, you might, let's say in these days you have a virtual town hall and you've invited 1,500 people and let's say 200 show up. Well, I would say, okay, we've got, you know, a challenge here. We're not having much turnout, right? Yeah. And I might make that mean something. But in actuality, maybe there's something else happening in the organization that maybe I should have been aware of, and it's a competing priority that, you know, has taken people's attention in a different way. So I think there's, you know, I guess, beware of the assumptions that we might make as change practitioners and in terms of what some of those people KPIs say or do not say. But really want to understand how people are thinking and feeling. And some of that can be inferred by attendance or can be inferred by how people respond to surveys, for example. But I do think there's other KPIs that can be driven by change. So, you know, take a look at, you know, if it's a big, large, you know, org change, how is attrition? How is day-to-day performance? How is employee engagement? You know, HR has a lot of different metrics by which they're pulsing the organization. It may not be specific to a particular change, but the change might actually be influencing how people are thinking and feeling about their job at large, right? There's also KPIs about the change program in general. So, I would want to know how many readiness activities or preparedness activities have we done, how many are forthcoming, how many communications have gone out, how many training sessions do we have slated. Just even looking at it from a sheer numbers perspective really tells you how robust your change program is and really where there might be some areas of opportunity for us to communicate better or to reach people and prepare them in a way that feels specific and unique to their area and their particular needs.
Yeah. No, Kate, I love it. So let's shift towards the software, because you are the founder and CEO of ChangeSync, software for change management.
Yes.
What inspired you to go and create software for change management?
So I think at the core of it, Brian, really was, as I continued on through my career, I was taking on larger and more complex change projects.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant that there were just a lot more people that I was responsible and my team was responsible for moving through said change at that time. And I take it to heart that, and ProSci talks about it, but an organization really is a sum of its individual parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to make sure that the individuals going through that change are feeling good about it. They don't have to all feel great about it, but at least they feel informed, they feel empowered, they feel like they have a voice, right? And they're part of that transformation. Because again, the sum of all of them, dictates whether it's a successful change or not, and whether the organization can really, see the benefits that were intended. So that was one piece of it. Then the other piece of it was, in order for me to understand if people were successfully moving through the change or where there were areas of opportunity, the amount of time to aggregate the data and pull it together in a meaningful way was very cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
It would take days, if not weeks, and a team of people to pull it together, which at that point it was stale. So I was always feeling like we were chasing, where I really wanted to be more strategic. I wanted to say, I want at the click of a mouse to understand which parts of the organization are trending well. And I want to be able to drill down into the departments, into the teams, into even down to the individual level and see how people are doing. And I wanted to create that transparency, not only for the centralized change team, but also for the leaders. So ChangeSync has capabilities that it's a real-time software system where you can see how an organization is trending through change. Leaders can log in and they see their teams. They only see the people that report up to them, as they should. Yeah. But they can look at all of their employees. They can see what they've gone through, what is coming, impending in terms of activities for them to attend. Yeah. And ChangeSync really brings a lot of disparate systems into one platform.
Awesome.
So, gone are the days of having to aggregate data from SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or whatever survey platform and try to figure out, how that maps out to an organization if the survey wasn't designed to already do that. Mm-hmm. Then you've got things over in SharePoint, for example, and then you've got things over in Dropbox, and it just really brings it all together. So it's one central location for a change team to work from. And then quite frankly, it tells the story of change for an organization. So all of the change related projects are in one platform. So if you are the director over an enterprise change office, you have one platform by which you can see all of your change projects for all of your people. Lots of data to report out on it. So when you have to go to that, executive sponsor meeting, spending a ton of time, aggregating the data, it's right there for you to see. And what that did is it just allows change practitioners to be more strategic. They're not having to look historically at things that they've done, but they're able to manage it in real time and see metrics about employee sentiment, thoughts, feelings, and initiatives that are happening or coming up with dashboards and whatnot to really be more effective. is what
Yes,
it comes down
yes,
to.
yes. I love it because the the more we can start being more strategic, the more value can really be created in the organization, and get away
Exactly.
from doing all the deliverables. It's just yeah, we can become more data driven. I love it. I love it. I love it. Kate, listen, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yes, I really, really appreciate you contributing to our virtual summit, and we'll be sure to share more information about ChangeSync. So,
Perfect.
yep,
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
absolutely. So, so Kate, can you tell the viewers your website and where they can find you?
Sure. So LinkedIn, we have our ChangeSync LinkedIn page. We also have our website, which is just ChangeSync, sync.com. And they can also email me. Feel free to, kate@changesync.com, and be happy to engage with you, answer any questions. And change management is my space. So love chatting with fellow change practitioners about anything. So
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
All right, Kate, thank you so much.